Good afternoon, everyone. I am Abhishek Vijayagopal and I manage SciSec's academic programs, focusing on skilling and promoting research. We'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, a few ground rules. All the attendees to the webinar will be on mute until the completion of the talk from the speaker. We will have a Q&A at the end of the talk. You can either type your question on the chat window or do a raise of hands, in which case we will unmute you. Today's is the 49th webinar in the Samgacchadhwam series. We had to pause this webinar series due to circumstances, but we will now aim to be regular with this series of webinars. Earlier this year, the government of Karnataka took an exciting step by providing cyber security as a specialization option for diploma students. And we at SciSec helped to draft the syllabus for this course. For the next 1.5 months, our focus will be on covering the various topics in this syllabus. Whilst we are sure it will be of assistance to the students who have opted for this specialization, we are nonetheless confident that it will help other students or working professionals who are interested in cybersecurity as well. Cybersecurity is not just a critical domain, but is also a complex topic. We will aim to provide an overview of each of these domains with opportunities for conducting hands-on activities and with some pre or post reading material as may be required to help you to go into further depth. We hope that this will kindle your interest to explore further. The topic of today's webinar is Vulnerability Assessment and Penetration Testing, or VAPT. This is being done as a two-part webinar series, and today's webinar is the first part. Our speaker for today, Mr. Nikhil Kulkarni, who's an independent security consultant, will provide an overview of the following topics. Penetration testing basics, which includes understanding Burp suite and the basics of the HTTP protocol, and OWASP security vulnerabilities, which would cover injections, cross-site scripting, CSRF, security misconfigurations, and broken access control. On the coming Thursday, that is the 22nd of December, in the same time slot, we will continue with the 50th webinar in this series, which would be on the topic of vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, part 2, which would also be delivered by Mr. Nikhil Kulkarni. The registration for the same can be done by clicking the link on the SciSec website that I will post now in the chat box, and by using the link to the Google form to register. I have now posted the link to register for webinar number 50 of the Samgacchadhwam series in the chat box. This is a link to the SciSec website. I request all of you to please share this link with your colleagues and with your students who would be interested in learning and understanding more about the topic of VAPT. To access the previous webinars, I request you to please go to the SciSec website as well as to our YouTube channel. I'd like to request all of you to kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. It will help you to get to know when new recordings are out, and it will help us in getting better traction and visibility. I will now come to the scheme of webinar and assessment for today's webinar, which is webinar number 49. We will first have the webinar number 49 that will be delivered by Mr. Nikhil Kulkarni, which will then be followed by Q&A. There is an assessment for today's webinar, the link to which shall be provided to you through the chat box at the end of today's webinar, that is after the webinar and the Q&A. This assessment, please note, will be open for only 60 minutes and will be followed by webinar feedback. Webinar feedback includes quantitative and qualitative feedback questions that would help us in improving the content and delivery of future webinars. So we request you to answer those two in all seriousness. Please note that there are separate assessments for both parts. That is, there is a separate assessment for VAPT Part 1 and there's a separate assessment for VAPT Part 2. We request all the participants to kindly use a Gmail address only to take the assessment. Please do not use multiple mail addresses per participant, as this will lead to confusion in identification and certification. It's possible that if you use the wrong email address, you may not be able to secure a certificate even though you might be eligible to do so. Avoid using fictional addresses like jddj@gmail.com, as that does not help us identify the participant who would be legitimately eligible for a certificate in case he or she crosses the certification threshold. And what is the certification threshold? Participants who score 10 or more points out of 15, that is, who get 10 or more correct answers out of 15, would be eligible for a certificate. There is no negative marking, and therefore I would like to encourage the participants to attempt as many questions as possible. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today, Mr. Nikhil Kulkarni. Nikhil is an independent security researcher and an international security trainer. His area of interest includes web application penetration testing, mobile application security, and machine learning. He has presented his talks at international and national level conferences and at different meets such as Nui Du Hack Paris, OWASP AppSec, COCON International Cyber Policing and Security Conference, DEFCON Bangalore Chapter, Null Open Security Meet Bangalore, Null Open Security Meet Mysuru. He is also a bug bounty hunter and has been listed and acknowledged in the Hall of Fames of companies such as Microsoft, Apple, Adobe, Nokia, Engine Yard, and Avira. He also leads the Bangalore chapter of the Null Open Security Community currently, and he has worked in companies like Fourth Wall Security, IGS, and most recently was working with ThoughtWorks. He is an alumnus of the M.S. Ramaiah Institute of Technology, from where he obtained his BE in Information Science and Engineering that was awarded by the Visvesvaraya Technological University in the year 2016. You can reach out to Nikhil on Twitter at NIKCHILLZ, that is at Nick Chills. I'll repeat his Twitter handle at the rate NIKCHILLZ. Nikhil, I request you to please unmute yourself.
Hi, Abhishek. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible. Can we get your camera on, please?
Yes, let me do that. Yep. Is my camera on as well?
Yeah,
Okay, that's great.
we can see you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Cool. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for that great introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikhil. As Abhishek just gave an introduction, I'm not going to spend much time doing that. I'll jump right into this topic of today, which is purely about vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So this is going to be two-part series, at least the VAPT part I'm talking about. The first one is to fundamentally understand the very fundamental basics that we are going to be working with further. Further as to look at how we are going to be exploiting these different set of vulnerabilities. So I'm going to be giving you a quick gist of what are the different vulnerabilities that we are going to be looking at in the next sessions. But prior to that, we'll focus on the very basics, the very fundamentals, the kind of tools that we look at when we do a penetration testing, a web application penetration testing specifically, and also certain HTTP basics. When we do a penetration testing of an application, how does the request look like, and how does the also look the key areas of these responses that we look at, and then how do we manipulate it, or how do we try to get any other information that we possibly could. And these information that we obtain could be eventually utilized for us to perform other kinds of different attacks on the application or find different set of vulnerabilities. So with that, I'll proceed further. I'll quickly share my screen. uh, Let me know if my screen is visible. Is this visible?
Yes, Nikhil. Yeah, we can see your PPT. Yeah.
So as part of the agenda, it's purely three aspects. One is understanding the VAPT part of it, understanding this tool called as Burp Suite, and looking at the HTTP basics. This is what I'm going to be covering for today. The other areas could involve, as I said, it's purely based on looking at certain security vulnerabilities such as injections or cross-site scripting attacks and all of these. But it's purely going to be a little surface level for today. But we're going to be diving in depth in the next session. Uh, okay, so to start off with, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing is something that's been carried out in the industry for quite some time now. The tools, the mechanisms, how we do it have certainly evolved over the course of time. The way we used to do it 10 years ago and the way we used to do it now has phenomenally changed. Okay. Vulnerability assessment, in a nutshell, basically is about assessing your entire web application for any level of application security vulnerabilities. So what it exactly means is your application, if they are vulnerable to a certain level of attacks, such as, let's say, your injections, or say any other uh, I think, as Abhishek mentioned about OWASP top 10 as a set of vulnerabilities. So the applications are usually vulnerable to these kind of attacks. And why do these vulnerabilities even arise? And how do the security engineers try to find these vulnerabilities? Is what vulnerability assessment would get involved with. So vulnerability assessment is to see whether the vulnerability even exists or not. The penetration testing, the PT part of it, is purely the intrusive mechanisms that are involved in this process. So penetration testing would actually involve the security engineers doing what a typical attacker would do on the application, try and see if they could get an admin access or a root access into the system or into the application. So that is what purely the VAPT is all about. Okay, so when we do a vulnerability assessments, it's just to see if a particular application is vulnerable to a series of attacks or not. Penetration testing is to going a bit further ahead to see if if these vulnerabilities exist, yes, and if they exist, are they something that could be exploited, for the attacker to gain more information or level or any levels of access, or whatever their motive basically is. Okay, so that's in a nutshell very purely about what VAPT is all about. Okay, so in when we do a VAPT for applications, we usually use certain different set of tools. The very much or the very widely used tool of them is called as Burp Suite. You get basically a community edition, and you also get a professional and an enterprise version of these. But in today's session, we are purely focusing on the community versions of this. This is something that you can easily obtain with by just googling it out, and then you should be able to download them. And let me quickly show how it exactly looks like. uh, so this is something that how burps would exactly would look. So you have a dashboard here. There is a target where you define what your target is going to be. Then there's a proxy. So burpsuit is basically a local proxy tool that you use to that basically acts as as a proxy tool, between your application and the server. So let me take an example. So let's say you are bringing in burp suite between your browser and your server. The way this works is the burp suite would tell the browser that, hey, I am the actual server, you can you can interact with me. And it will tell the server that I am the client and you can interact with me, as a client server model. So that's how it basically talks to each other. So this basically, as it is a proxy, it comes in the bit in between the communication that's happening between your client and your server. Okay, so that's where your proxying comes in, right? So there are a bunch of other tools that burpsuit actually comes with. So we're going to be looking at certain aspects like proxy, intruder, repeater, sequencer, decoder, and all of that. I'll certainly dig in deeper as I proceed further on this. So the way this works is, once you're able to download this particular tool, you will have to, I mean, of course, after all the installation is done, the way you could basically use this is, let's say you open up a particular browser. In this example, I'm going to be taking Firefox. Uh, okay, so let's say okay, so the way this would work is I need to go to the settings here. And in the settings, I would basically, let's say, type it out as proxy. And in the proxy settings, you will have to configure this. So let's say if my proxy is running on the port number 8080 on locally, so you will see that, the HTTP proxy, the address to be given as 127.0.0.1, which is the localhost address, and the port 8080, right? How do I figure out if it is running on port 8080? So for that, I'll have to open up Burp Suite. In the proxy, you will see there's something called as options. And in this options, you basically define as to where do you want this proxy to be running, right? So since we have, this is like a default setting that is present here. Now you go back and then you configure this. Then once you're done, you basically click OK. You also, if you want to sort of ensure that you HTTPS requests as well, then you can basically add this. There is also another step of process that is involved when it comes to uh, proxying and then intercepting web applications which go over HTTPS. Of course, most of the applications in this day and age go over HTTPS itself. So for which you will have to download a root certificate that is given by the Burp Suite itself. We'll discuss about it in over our calls. Of course, but I don't want it to be very overwhelming for you all. So once you've been able to make those configurations in your browser, now whichever website that you visit. So for example, in this situation, let's say I take up let's do it with this website itself, right? So I have created a Docker container where I'm running this vulnerable application on which I'll be giving a demo later on. So the way this would work is, let's say I try to sort of refresh this page. Let's say now I see that the interception is on. I click on this. You see that there are certain requests that are now coming in, which I'll basically have to forward, or if I want to sort of again drop this, I could do that. All right. So basically, this will intercept the requests that are going in from your browser to your server. And accordingly, you have the option what you exactly want to do here, right? Now, let me close this. Okay. Now, let's say I click on something else. Okay. So now I've kept the interception as off. And when the interception is off, when I want to perform anything, it would basically not go via the Burp Suite. It would basically directly go to the server itself, right? Now, let's say if I try to open up, if I again want to intercept, I turn on the interception. I would get into, okay, let's say I click on this different tab. You see that it is not opening up. It still shows the loading screen here, right? Now here it has started intercepting, right? Now it has started interception, right? Now only after you forward this, it will basically go to that particular page. Else it will not. Any questions so far, anyone?
Participants, if you have any questions, can you please post them in the chat box? Yeah, Nikhil, I don't think there's been any question so
Okay.
far, so I think you can continue.
All right. Cool. So this is a very fundamental thing about Burp Suite. Burp Suite is used for interception, as you all know. So this is how the usual interception would work, right? Now, with the same set of tools, we also have other aspects like Intruder. Okay. So Intruder is something that is utilized, when you would want to sort of specifically target a certain set of parameters. Like for example, if you would want to say you have captured a certain set of request in this, and you would want to brute force or basically try out different possible combinations for a given particular parameter, then what you do is basically right click that particular request. Say for login, I want to try out different different payloads or different inputs into that page or into those parameters. What I do is basically I send that to Intruder. So when I do that, you see here it comes up over here into the Intruder. And then here, let's say I want to sort of attack the session ID. Okay, session ID is one of the parameters here. We'll discuss about the HTTP request and the response header as well, as to how they look and what are the key aspects that you need to look at, when you're looking when you're trying to do a VAPT. Right now, let's say so you see that this is one parameter. The security that is given here, that also is a different parameter. Now you basically select this. So let's say if there is a if you don't want this to be coming under the purview of your intruders attack, so you basically clear this, and then you will see that those two symbols that were added for this particular parameter are now gone. Right, if you want to add it under the purview to be attacked, then you basically add this, or if you don't want it to be attacked, you basically clear them. Right, so once you do this, you can basically now basically go to the payload section. Payload is basically the different set of the different set of attack vectors that could be added in order for you to execute your basically execute the attack. Right, so now the way this works is you can basically add the payload from a different file. I know you can basically load it from a particular file, or you can start pasting it directly over here. If you have like a list of items that you want to it to be tried, like let's say here what we are trying to do is we are trying to brute force this particular PHP session ID, right? uh, and here or if you can probably add different values, right? Like for example, if I start adding ABC, something like this. So these start coming in a very sequential manner, one after the other. And then now when I start the or there are a bunch of other configurations as well that I can try out. Okay, and then in the resource pool, if you have like multiple other systems that you can add, you can select them as well. For now, we can skip this. There's not much of things that is needed. There are a bunch of other options also that you can look at. But these are a little advanced options at this point. We are not going to look at that. Now, what we are going to do is we start the attack and see what really happens. Right. So we basically gave 4 different payloads here. Of course, the only payloads that we could see on the other side was these 3 payloads that we had given. There was one more, which is an empty payload. But you see that the status is being given as 200 OK. Right? So does that mean that our PHP session ID has been accepted? We'll have to look at it. At least from the response that we see, it has given a 200 OK. Of course, we are going to be discussing about what are these HTTP status codes, and we'll discuss about them as well. Of course, it says that it has given a 200 OK, which basically means that yes, our brute force has basically worked, right? So this is a quick example as to how the intruder basically works. Now, in the similar lines, let's say you have multiple different other parameters that you want to test. Okay. Now, what I'll do is, let's say I take up another request. Let's say I think let's take up a similar kind of a request. Okay. Now, what I'll do is I'll send it to repeater. Now, when I send this to repeater, your repeater console basically shows up like this. And here, what happens is you have the option to meddle with your request and the responses. Okay, so let's say this is your request, and when you send it, what is the response that you get? Basically you're getting a HTTP 302 found response. And if you want to sort of look at it in other different formats also, you have that option. But for now, okay, so it basically says that okay, 302 found, and then you can go ahead. Okay, so let's say I want to sort of meddle around with this inputs that I'm giving. the inputs that it is currently taking is admin, the username as admin and password as password, and then the login button, which is basically to login. Okay, so for people who are getting confused right now, I do understand, this might be a little overwhelming. Let me show it to you in the visual terms how it exactly looks. So let's say, let me try to log out from here. Okay, now, so this is the page, this is the login page, right? You see here, this is the login. Now, of course, you will have to give in your username and password here, right? So the username and password for this particular application right now is admin and password. Okay. So the third parameter, so these two are the parameters on this page, username, password. There's one more parameter, which is the login, right? So all you do here is click, right? And you get in. Now, in that's what we are trying to do here as well. Now, in the repeater, in the request, you see that there are three parameters that are there in the body of this HTTP request, right? You have your username, then you have your password, then you are saying that, okay, so with this date, with these two data, try, basically you're clicking the login, right? And there's a user token that is gets associated. Now, uh, now let's say I want to try out if I can add any other different passwords and see if I can log in. So let's say I just added some random characters here. What really happens in the response? I'm basically getting a 302 found. Okay, it does say 302 found, but then I don't know if it really works, right? So let's say I open up a browser. Okay, so I'll give any random characters here. I'll try and see if I can log in. It doesn't allow me, right? So does that mean our attack did not work? Yes, of course. But the catch here also is that in the repeater we could see that uh, you know it gave us a 302, which is of more of like a redirection HTTP response. Uh, it isn't it confusing, right? So at times it does happen that the way these HTTP response codes are given by the developers is not correct. If they're not correctly done, then it usually so happens that even if it is supposed to be a 404 page not found, or or a bad gateway, or some level of server side of errors, it needs to basically change. But sometimes if developers have not developed it well, then they end up sort of end up seeing kind of problem. So this is just a gist. Any questions so far? Please add it in the chat section so that I can look at them right now. Okay, you're saying any documents or presentation. Okay, I just want to understand, is there an expectation that you want me to give like a document or presentation on these topics? If yes, let me know. Uh, Okay, okay. So I believed, it is better to sort of give a hands-on session directly than the presentation. If that's something that is needed, I can for sure send it out as a document to Abhishek, and probably from there, you can take it from there. I hope that works, Abhishek.
Yeah, Nikhil, that should work. Yeah.
Okay.
There aren't any other questions in the chat. Uh, Yeah, so someone saying hands-on
Is
is
must.
must.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. Sort of to understand from setup and hands-on as well. Yes. Sure. I will for sure share that of course. Cool. So with this, okay. So I believe so far I think things have been understood by every one of us. There are a bunch of other things also, sequencer. There's also something called as decoder, which we can certainly look at in the upcoming set of in the time. But I think the main fundamental uh, tools that we see right from a proxy perspective is the main burp proxy, the intruder, and the repeater itself. Most of the things happen in these three areas only. There are other parts, like for example, there is something also called as encoding and decoding, right? Again, don't confuse this with encryptions. Encoding is purely to it's a different format that is used for the data to be sent from one particular system to another. It is certainly not encryption under any stretch of imagination. So please do not consider that. So what happens when you are given a particular file format in a particular given in a particular encoded format? You would want to decode that, right? So this particular area certainly helps to decode those aspects. Okay, so that's on the proxy, intruder, and repeater. Okay, so now let us look at some of the fundamentals that of the HTTP, right? So when you look at HTTP overall, right, HTTP basically has, the way this would work is, of course, you make a request and then there is a response that comes back as part of it, right? So in the request itself, you will see, whatever you're trying to. So there are two aspects to it. One is your header, and the other part is your body of the request, right? Now the header basically comprises of a lot of aspects that are specific to the browser specific data, or your cookie values, or how is the connection, what is the content type, what length is the content needs to be, and all of and the user agent and all these aspects, right? And after that, you see there's like a space that you see here, there's like a single line space. Post that is where your body starts. Okay, I can pick up any of the other requests responses just to sort of show that, or if not, I can probably create one more, right? Okay, so let's take this. I know this is all gibberish, we may not be able to understand what is here in the body, but just to sort of showcase how the requests usually look like, you see this particular area is your header information, and post that there is a single line of space, and after that all you see here is purely the body of the request. Okay, that is your request. In the similar lines, you also have, you basically get the response from the application, or from the application server, right? So this is how it would basically look like. This again is the header region, and of course you also have a body as a response. So I'll try and see if I could get any response anywhere here. Yeah. So you see that there is this particular portion which is header, and then the rest of it is basically the body, right? Now, again, these request attributes, all. So when you look at a particular request, right? Again, there are a bunch of uh, attributes to it, right? So basically, this first line basically defines what is the method that is being used. So this is the get method. So when you sort of highlight this, you get an understanding, right? Here, it says that the method name is get, right? So there are a bunch of different methods to HTTP. There's something called as get method. There is put, post, delete options, and all of these, right? In the document that I'm going to be sharing, that will contain all those different details about all these different HTTP methods that are available. So you see that there is get method. Somewhere you will also see there is post method. So the major difference between these methods, at least if you look at from the major ones, which is get and post, is in the get method, the data goes usually in the URL. The data, like for example, if I take up this, right, the username and password here is going as a post parameter, right? It is not going as a get parameter. If it was get, it would basically go in as part of the URL itself, right? The way this would look is, if you see this uh, as the URL, the parameters would then go something like this, and username is equals to admin, and password is equals to say password, right? So this is how it would go if it was a get method, right? Since it is not, it would basically we are going basically sending the details in the post method, right? The post method basically has its body, and then that's where it basically it doesn't go in the usual URL format, right? Now this is how it basically looks like. There are other options such as delete, put options method as well. Of course, I'll be sharing those details in the document I'm sharing, right? So now in the request itself, so this is done, right? You're specifying what is the method that you want to use, and then what is the page on which this uh, request is being sent for. So in this scenario, it is login.php. Then you're defining what HTTP version that you're using. Here we are defining it as version 1.1, and you also define what is the host that you're looking at. Something like if this is our host address, which is basically playwithdocker.com, and you define what is the user agent, right? The user agent is basically the browser. So in this case, say I'm using Mozilla Firefox, that's where it basically tells that, okay, so this is the version of the user agent, right? And there are other aspects like, what is the language, accepted language, accepted encoding, what is the content type, and what content length it is, and where is this particular request even originating from, right? And who is the referrer, and what is the cookie value, right? So cookie is something that will allow you to have a session open, right? For example, if I as a user log into a particular website, the time between I log in and the time between I log out is basically a session, right? And this session has to be identified somehow, right? So how do I ensure that a particular session is associated with this particular user called Nikhil, right? That's of course is done by the session ID, and also the duration of it and all of that is something that gets defined, right? So that's where your cookie would basically come in, and then there are a bunch of other request parameters, right? In the similar lines, you will see the response parameters here, right? The response parameters would basically include, what is the HTTP version that this is accepting and this is using, and you see that HTTP status code that is given out, right? So HTTP status codes have a different layers of status codes. So anything that you see with 100x, 100x as in starts with 1, like 100, all these aspects. So those are informational. Anything that is around 200 and all these are okay, which means that that the page is loading perfectly fine. Like you will see the status codes here given as 200, right? uh, quite a lot of places you will see 204 also. If there is no content, of course, it says that, okay, the pay, everything works fine, but there is no content to be shown back. Okay, so that's where you will see 204 and all these things. So 200s are usually, those are usually not the error kind of HTTP methods. But on the other side, 300s and all of those are something that involves a lot of redirection. If a particular website is redirecting you to a different domain or a different website, whether permanently or temporarily, and all of those, that's where your 300 specific status HTTP status codes are shown. The 400 are usually, the 404 page not found and all of those that you have seen, right? So those are basically the errors, and the 500 status codes are basically also something that are specific to bad gateways or server specific errors and all of those. So again, so this entire first line defines about what is the HTTP version, and then what is the HTTP status code that is being used, right? All these other fundamental things are very fundamental. What is the date when this response is being sent, what server is being used, And if this is going to be like a first uh, response that is being sent back to the application, then it also sort of basically sets the cookie value. This set the cookie value basically tells the uh, someone says I'm not audible. Am I audible? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I think maybe you can come a little closer to your mic. At times, maybe your audio drops. So,
Okay,
or
okay, my
can
bad.
yeah, or
My,
can you use earphones, headphones? Might be.
sure, let me do that. Is this better? Am I audible now?
Yeah, you can be just a little loud. Just your voice.
Okay,
Yeah, I
okay,
think
sure, sure,
that's fine.
sure, Abhishek. Okay, cool. Okay, so we were talking about the set cookie value, right? The set cookie basically, tells that, okay, so starting forward, so this is going to be your cookie value. So in this case, it is PHP session ID. So this is a very unique value that is given to this particular session and for this particular user, right? Now, every time the next set of requests come in, the application basically has to add this value, this particular PHP session ID, and then send out the request every time the request is being made, right? So we could see that, this is the PHP session ID. Uh, okay. So in the similar lines, I'm trying to see if there is other request responses that could be explained. Uh, yeah, so this is something that has got to do with something called as CORS, which is cross origin resource sharing. Will I don't think so. Today would be the right way to look at this, because I mean we considering the fact that this is a little advanced topic, we may not want to touch upon this today. Of course, I can do that in the next session when we are discussing about these other different set of attacks. Uh, Other areas, like when do you want when does this response basically expire, and if there's any cross-origin resource policy that is being used, and then what is the server that is running, what is the content length, and all of that. And also you will eventually see the response body as well. Right? This is in a nutshell everything about the how the request and the responses usually work. Any questions? So this is what happens in the backend, when you're trying to make a request using your browser, basically. So if whenever you try to sort of click on a particular uh, link or a particular tab, that's the kind of request that you will basically see in the backend happening. Okay, there are a certain set of questions. What is the difference between HTTP 1 and HTTP 2? Okay, cool. So, of course, so there have been quite a lot of uh, changes that have happened in HTTP version 1 and version 2. I'm not sure as to what are the nitty-gritty changes that have happened, of course, but it's purely the upgradation of HTTP versions, I would say. From the 1.0 to 1.1 is what I meant. Yeah. So, I think for the nitty-gritty details, I think we'll have to check it out as to what are the changes that have happened. Sure, I'll talk about the broken authentication attack as well. Yes. So, but let's go over step by step to understand the fundamentals first, and then we can start looking at the attack areas. How to know response for header and body? Can you be more specific in this question? When you say how to know response for header and body, I didn't quite get the question. I think if you can post it to everyone, is that an option?
Yeah, I'd request the participants to please post the questions to everyone. It will help
Everyone,
in
huh?
assessing
Yeah,
in
for
case,
others also.
there is any misunderstanding or any mistake in the question. Do not post private messages to the speaker, please.
Okay, like you highlight for request. Okay. Uh, okay. So you mean to say when I highlight this, you're not able to see those aspects, is what you meant, right? So in the rest, you also see the response headers here, right? So these will basically help you to understand, the name is actually what is the value that is given. So if this is something that you meant, yes, you can still do that here. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think you can carry on, Nikhil. The questions are
Okay, okay, sure, sure. All right. Okay, so this in a nutshell, is purely about how Burp Suite works and then what HTTP requests and responses are all about. Okay, so we will start looking at the application security vulnerabilities one by one. Okay, so let's take an example here. So this is a sample application that I've taken, which is called Damn Vulnerable Web Application (DVWA). This is intentionally a vulnerable application, so you can use it, you can download it, you can try out all your security specific uh, uh, vulnerability learnings on this. Okay, so this does have certain set of vulnerabilities that are currently there. Like I'm keeping it for low so that it becomes easy for you all to understand. So there is brute force, command injection, CSRF, and all of those aspects, right? So the way this works pretty much like any application for that matter. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to brute force, right? How do I brute force basically? I'll have to basically add a username and password and then basically have to click login now, right? Now, the way I can start attacking this is I'm sure we have just tried this out, but we can try it out again. Okay. So if I am going to look at my burp suite interception, I click on the interceptor to be on, and I just randomly give some inputs. Okay, and let me click on login. You will see that the request starts showing up on your Burp suite. Okay, so this is coming up here. Okay, so what I can do is I can highlight this. Let's say if I want to test this, I would give it a highlight and say test this. Okay, I could basically send it directly. I could either forward this or right click and then send it to repeater. Okay, right from here. So let's say I forward this. It says user. Okay, welcome to the password protection admin area admin. Okay, so basically, because admin is one of the users, it does basically allow, right? Now, if I want to sort of brute force this again, what I'm going to do is, say, uh, just a second, trying to, I'm just trying to change this. Yeah, I'll send this to repeater since I want to brute force this. Okay, I forward this, then I go to this intruder.
So now I'll have to look at which are the parameters that I'm going to brute force. Okay. So this is not something that I want to brute force. So I'm going to remove these characters that are sort of encapsulating the parameters. So I'll clear this. I'm going to clear this as well. Okay. So let's say we have given the username as test. Let's say we are in a situation where we know that the username is admin. Okay. And I want to test out the what are the you know what is the possible password. Right? So let's say I'm only testing password. I'm only testing password. I mean, password. Now I go to the page section, a list of words. I could load it from load it from a text. I'll try to check keyword and okay, and then I'll add the actual password that we know. Since we already know what is the password here, I'm just straight away adding it here. Okay. Now I then start the attack. Okay. You now see that when you try to, so you will see that the status, the HTTP status code that is given is same for all of them. Okay. And you also get to see the request and the response for the attack that has happened. Now, we will have to do some level of, again, digging in deeper. In the responses, you will see things are going to be different. Okay. Uh, so the response that you would have probably received for the actual real password versus the real password is going to be different. So you will see that the username and password is incorrect for the other ones, right? But for this one, where the password is actually correct, you will eventually see in the response that the password to be correct, right? It says, welcome to the password protected area admin, right? So yes, so the whole idea here is to, of course, we knew the password, we also knew the username here. So that's not the thing. The way this works is purely based on, it will start querying with that particular parameter every time you try to sort of uh, instead of you trying it manually, right? So with changing that parameter for password, it will basically start doing it over the course of one after the other, one after the other again. Any questions? This was very simple.
No questions as of yet in the chat.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. So the on the first question for
Yeah, Nikhil, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there is a question.
uh,
Okay.
according to this is okay, and when to use the verification and the proof in in then see what is the response. But it is specific. Is very specific. You want to give the track a particular uh, different try on the example as an example. And then the second one. So finally, it So finally, the intruder is purely for attacks that are very specifically targeted for a particular parameter or a small group of parameters, typically for like something like brute forcing, as we saw. But repeater is could be used for a varied set of attacks, so as to say. It's a repeater would involve some level of manual be done because you have to make changes every time, and then you're trying to send it again to see what responses. Like for example, if I want to sort of do the same, if I do QRT here and then send the request and look at the response, then I'll have to go see the response, what it is giving me. Okay, so it says, oh, username and password is incorrect. Now again, I'll have to search for something else and again look at the second option, and then okay, I'll have to do it. Instead of doing this, I could rather go with intruder and then use the intruder for that kind of an attack. But rather, repeater would allow me to make manipulation to see how the responses come back. And for okay, uh, and because the request is purely defined, but again, other different instead of into a style process using the first and see what's one that for example list down one after the other say uh, that okay, so the next question, if you want to use different types of if that and lots of access, I've answered this one which is force resource command as command SQL injection here is not injection attacks. Basically, listed attacks. This is not based on based on these things. So, if you're given a technology, how an attacker would exploit the way to understand analogy that is possible to take some time, but overall,
Nikhil, your voice is breaking.
implementation of this some kind of possible. But am I audible now? Better? Am I? Is this better?
Yeah, this seems to be much better. I don't know what happened in the middle, but
Okay, okay, sure. My bad. Uh, okay, great. So the way I guess, don't think of it that okay. So let's see, I'm going to only no only look at the vulnerabilities. If you honestly see, again, it is purely based on how these tech stacks are implemented. If a particular technology is implemented, how if a particular technique and what are the current
Nikhil, I think we lost your audio and video.
that this particular So I think that every show was even looks at. Can you hear me? Vulnerabilities that the OWASP top.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Nikhil is just reconnecting. We hope he'll be able to resume his presentation from the point where it got interrupted.
Everyone.
Yeah, Nikhil, there is a lot of break in your voice. Yeah, I can hear you, but a lot
Abhishek,
of garbling.
uh,
Yeah, Nikhil. Hello.
can you hear me, Abhishek?
Yes, I can hear you, Nikhil. It's a
Okay,
much clearer now. Can you share your
okay,
screen, please?
sure. Let me do that. Okay, is my screen visible now?
Yeah, your screen is visible now. Yes.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I think for that question, I
Maybe
was just
because of
trying to show
bandwidth, maybe you might like to keep
possible.
your video off for a while.
Yes, yes, I've turned off the video.
Yeah. Okay, dear
Okay.
participants, Nikhil has turned off his video. We hope you're able to hear him and you're able to see his presentation also. Can anyone please confirm on the chat? Yeah, Nikhil, I think you can please resume from where you left off.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so basically for that question, I was trying to answer that, I think at a very fundamental level, if you want to look at the OWASP top 10 is something that is that we could start off with, It basically lists down the different set of vulnerabilities that are widely found across the globe. uh, Something like your excessive cross-site scripting or your SQL injections. Those are the kind of attacks that are usually found. Okay, so you can start off from here, but then eventually you will have to start looking at technologies and then how they're implemented, and then accordingly frame what kind of attacks could be possible. Okay, so this is that. Any other set of questions that you would want to basically ask?
In case anybody has questions, can you please type it out in the chat box?
Okay, all right. So I think we can proceed further then. Okay, I believe my screen is visible. Okay, so let's look at other vulnerabilities, right? So cross-site scripting is another vulnerability that is quite uh, widely seen out on the internet. Okay, so what really happens as a cross-site scripting attack is basically an attacker would try to inject a malicious script into the input parameter. So let's try that out if it's even possible. So I'll see what is the level. Okay, it's kept as low at this point. So let's say here, if I type out my name, so this is a simple functionality where if I try to type out my name, it would basically say hello Nikhil. Okay, so let me try to add some HTML injection, HTML tags into this. Let's say I try to add the header tag, header one. Okay, and I see, and I close this. Okay, so you see that it's given as normal. Hello Nikhil. Okay, now you see that this is hello. The Nikhil has gone into a header format, right? The uh, H1 tag. In the similar lines, I want to add, let's say, a marquee.
Yeah, Nikhil, there are a couple of questions in the chat. I hope you have seen them.
Let me see. Sure.
Yeah, there's one related to the platform that you're working on,
Yeah,
another one related to vulnerabilities.
this one, right? Yeah, this platform. This is the application that we're talking about. It is called damn vulnerable web application. So I can give you the links of these when I'm sharing the document with Abhishek. This is a vulnerable application by default. It is purely used for us to for purely for learning purposes. You can try out how much ever vulnerabilities that you want to exploit on this application without any problem, right? So that is one. Uh, how we can find vulnerabilities in particular lines, sir? Okay, okay, okay. So in a particular line, that's not how it should usually work. You need to look at the particular functionality or a particular misconfiguration, and only then you will be able to see if something could be exploitable. Okay, I know what you exactly mean, but I'll show you how this could be done. Okay, so let's continue on this. Okay, or I'll rather first show that part and then come back to this. So let's say I have opened up repeater here. So you're saying this is a particular line, right? Don't look at it as a particular line or a particular area of this particular request, but it's purely a kind of a functionality, right? Where you're basically giving your username and password. Look at it that way, right? And say you want to make changes somewhere here, try and see if this connection could be open or something. I don't know if this even works and what kind of responses it would give back. It pretty much gave a same kind of a response, right? So it basically revolves around modifying and manipulating these request parameters to see what kind of responses that we get. Okay, it's purely that. If you're looking at from the application request perspective, don't think of it from a line perspective. Of course, you will have to make changes to these lines, but don't say that. Okay, don't think that if I make change to only one particular line, will I be able to attack or something like that? No. Okay. So yeah, so we were talking about cross-site scripting. So cross-site scripting again is, I mean, it's a vulnerability where the attacker basically tries to input a malicious script into the application's parameter, right? So in this scenario, we could see that I could add my name and then it would basically print out the name here, right? Now, what I'll try to do is I'll try to add a malicious script. Okay, a simple script that will basically say that will show the document of the cookie document. Okay, okay. So what exactly happened here is it basically showed me the PHP session ID, right? And the security is kept as low. So this is something. This is the value, right? The when the session value is something that gets exposed, then it is very critical for an application or for that particular user, right? So the malicious script here, what it did was it basically popped up the session ID value. Now, what I'm doing here is very simple. I'm just making it pop the session ID, but if I want, I can also make the session ID go to a different location and get stored there, right? And this could be done via scripts, of course, right? Now, this is all about how much time I would need to sort of sit and write that particular script for me to send out that session ID, to a different location altogether. Or I could also make some kind of a page redirection. Like, someone who visits this page will have to get redirected to a different page. Or something, or a different kind of a malicious intent if I have, I can accordingly script it out and then try to perform it here, right? And that's what the cross-site scripting vulnerability deals about. We'll look into the in-depth details of this in the next session that we are doing, of most of the vulnerabilities that I'm going to be discussing today about. We'll look into in depth, in the next session, right? So the reflected cross-site scripting is a vulnerability where the the payload execution happens only for that particular user and for that particular page, right? So the vulnerability is in this parameter where you're trying to enter, but it does not get stored anywhere, either on in the database or anywhere on the server side, right? It is only at that for particular moment is where that attack is possible on that particular page or only for that particular user, right? So if I refresh this page, okay, so if I refresh the page, you will see that those values are not there now anymore, right? You could see hello, and then there was one more thing that was trying to rotate here. Those are those changes are not here, right? But on the other side, in the XSS stored, uh, that is not the case. Here, the things would get stored in the database. For example, let's say I gave, this is a simple place where I could basically add in some comment, and then this comment would basically get stored. Okay, so if I try to add this, it will basically get stored here, right? Now, if I want to add, uh, okay, so let's say I add my name, and I say assign the guest book. It will basically show up that hello world, right? It basically is popping out. There's no malicious intent in this script. It is just basically popping up. Okay, now if I go back to this other different tab and then come back, so I come back to stored accesses again. Just give it a minute or two. It should load down. Yeah. After refreshing, it basically shows that this hello world still exists, right? So unlike the reflected accesses, the stored accesses still stores the parameter, or that malicious script that you had provided in it, right? Now, there is one more way of performing accesses called as DOM-based accesses, which we'll talk about in depth in the next session. Okay. So far, any questions? I see quite I think, things in the chat. So in short, under accesses, there are again different attacks. Yes, yes, there are different set of attacks in under accesses as well. Okay. Now, in the same lines, if you want to sort of automate this, right? Now, if I add a particular value here and I now start the interception, I submit this, right? And I basically can send it to repeater, or I can also send it to intruder based on the way I want to look at how this could be attacked, right? Now I can clear the places where I do not want this to sort of take any to attack these two parameters. The place where I want to attack is only this. So this will be the target. Now in the options when I go, sorry, in the payloads when I go, I'll have to start adding the different sort of payloads. Like for example, script, alert, uh, let's try document.cookie. Right? In the similar lines, there could be other set of scripts also that you can add, right? So you can list them down, and then you can probably also start your attack. Now, this could also be done, but if you want to sort of try out more, if you want to sort of again see what can be done, you can send it to repeater and basically make changes here. So do h1, then basically send it. And then see what kind of responses that you basically get for this. Okay. Since this is sent in a get value, I doubt if these tags are going to be considered and sent as well. That's where probably I can try out a different input and see if this works. Okay. Yeah, it gives back a 200. Okay. But usually, if you can also check if it could be sent via post method. If it is giving a response, then let's make a change then. Okay. So he's not considering it then. Yep. But I think you can try this out for the store-based accesses. So again, what we did here was a very straightforward and direct approach. But what we are trying to do here is a very precise when it comes to, let's say, you want to push it as an intruder or a repeater. Repeater would basically allow you to change other different parameters while you're making changes to your actual target area. This would basically allow that. Okay, there's a question that is asked. It says, how can we send attacks to different systems? Can we be more specific when you say different systems? What do you mean?
Yeah, so what do you mean when you say different systems? Can you please specify that?
Okay,
Yeah, Nikhil,
maybe.
I think that they'll take some time, so I think you can continue.
Sure, sure. Any other questions before we proceed?
I don't think there are any additional questions. So
Yeah, yeah. All right. Great. Okay, so this was about cross-site scripting. Okay, so there are a bunch of other attacks also possible, right? There is SQL injections that we can also probably try. I'll turn off the intersection. Okay, we'll discuss about this SQL injection in depth, the reason why it happens, which are the areas that are basically attacked. So the in-depth areas is something that I'm covering as part of the next session, which will involve SQL injection, XSS, command injection, and also the broken authentication, right? Uh, Broken authentication and also the authorization part. Okay, so these are the four areas. So SQL injection is again an attack that purely happens based on the misconfigurations in the SQL side, which is your database side. The reason that happens is, I believe all of you are here basically having a decent level of experience in uh, the, uh, the database, the DBMS systems. Okay, so let me take up a simple. Okay, so let me open up a text editor. Okay. So if you take up a particular SQL request, right? So let's say if if I submit a particular user ID, okay. So what this is doing is, so let's say this is an application now, okay. When I type in a user ID, say let's say user ID as one, it says the first name of that user ID is admin, the surname is admin, right? If I do the same for user ID two, it says the first name is Gordon, the surname is Brown. So in the similar lines, it basically lists down all the different set of users that are there, which is to an extent fine. It is not giving out any unwanted or any very sensitive information out, right? So this should to an extent is fine. But you need to understand what is the underlying query that is happening when a user basically types a number here, right? So what will basically happen when a user enters a particular number into this bracket? So it basically makes a query to the database saying that select the parameters which are select first name and surname from users uh, where ID equals 1, right? So this becomes your database query, right? Now you see here the condition part happens only after where, right? Where ID is equals to 1 is where the actual decision is involved, right? And this is where the attacks usually tend to happen, right? Now, what I could also do here is basically you're specifying this as ID is equals to 1 in these quotations. Now, what an attacker would basically do is they would basically say, they would make the changes in a such a way that there is some level of logically true statements that get added, and then that would basically make the systems act in a certain way. Okay, so what it basically means is, so let's say if I say select first name comma surname from users where ID is equals to 1, okay, or one equals 1, okay, nice, okay. What is happening here is basically uh, you are trying to basically say either choose this or basically choose the other option. Okay, so you can either give an option here, something like A, or this 1 is equals to 1 minus minus. So if you see 1 is equals to 1 is a logically true statement, right? And the minus minus basically says that anything after this needs to be considered as a comment, right? Now what happens is even if this is wrong, but since the other part is logically true, it would consider this as one of the conditions, right? Now, what I can do here is I can basically take this or say, I add the quotation and says or 1 equals 1 minus minus. Or if the syntax for this particular query is different, then I think we'll have to try out a bunch of more times, right? So it does say that you have an error in the SQL syntax. Checks the manual that corresponds to a MySQL server. Okay. Uh, uh, for the right syntax to use near the quotations at line 1. Okay. Okay. So basically the quotations are going to be different, I believe. So I believe let's try out and see if there's different quotations to be added here. Okay. So when I submit this, okay, until then, let me see if there's any questions. Okay, different systems I feel would be Linux, Windows, or mobile applications. Okay, and this is from the previous question. Okay, I'll answer that. So yeah, I think the syntax for this is a little different, but the underlying concept is the same. We can certainly look at the syntax when we are exploiting SQL injection. Overall, I think in the next session. Okay, so basically, this is the underlying concept. This is what happens since even if this is wrong, since the other aspect is correct, it would basically go through and then it would list down this. Now, since it is already listing down first name and surname, what I could also do is I could ask the uh, the MySQL query to list down if passwords are something that could be listed down, right? So instead of first name, surname, if I could also add uh, another query here, uh, using the union statement, add another query, and then basically ask it to reveal the password the way it is stored, it should also be able to do that. So again, it depends on how the passwords are being stored and all of those aspects. If the passwords are stored in plain text or if they're hashed, then that's a different story. But still, that to an extent could still be possible. Okay, so this is just at the gist level. I just wanted to sort of share with you guys, and as to how this would basically work at a very conceptual level. But we will be looking at these, at a deeper level. But today's session, what I wanted to have was to just set the basics right, that burp suite is something that we'll be using, and then a certain set of HTTP requests and the response headers as to how what are the areas that you would look at and what are the responses, how it should basically look at, and then I think that that should be good. Okay, coming back to the questions, you said that the different system I feel would be Linux, Windows, or mobile application, right? So basically, you're saying from a web application, how would you differentiate between attacking a mobile application versus attacking a user who is using a, a system, right? A Linux or a Windows system. Yes, that's a good question, in fact. So this really very well depends on who your target would be, right? For example, if you want to randomly target, if an attacker for that matter is randomly targeting each any user that the attacker wants to sort of attack, then they would basically keep things very generic, which would mean that they will basically lay the malicious scripts in a manner that these are something that could easily be get picked up by the users on Linux or on Windows. For mobile applications, it's going to be purely different because, of course, the things that would work on your normal desktop systems may not usually work on your mobile applications, right? And of course, mobile applications themselves come with a different kind of vulnerabilities in themselves. So that's a different story altogether. We can touch upon those aspects if needed on the mobile apps in a later set of series sessions, but that surely can be done. Okay. But coming to the desktop areas, which is again, let's say you're opening up on your browser, which is on your desktop, then to an extent, it is purely based on the browser. But if the browser is not secure enough, the attacks could also eventually lead to the to be even bypassing the security controls of the browser and then attacking the actual users itself. So in that scenarios, what the attacker would basically do is to make the user download a malicious file onto their systems. If they're targeting a Linux user, then they would basically create something that a Linux user would open. In the similar lines, if it is a if it is a Windows user, they would accordingly craft their payload or to craft their that attack vector in such a way that uh, the Windows user could be able to download it. Once they are able to download it, once the downloaded file executes it itself, is when the attack would be possible. But from a pure web application perspective, it is dependent on how the browsers handle those requests and how they are again sent back to the server. I hope I've been able to answer that question. Okay, great. So we look at one more of the vulnerability, which is on the command injection. Okay, so command injection again is an attack where the attackers basically tend to inject certain commands which are very specific to either the servers or the target users systems that is being run, right? For example, as I think in the previous question that was just asked, if an attacker wants to sort of perform some level of command injection where they know that the target user is or the target application's server is built on Linux, then they would accordingly add those kind of commands added into it. For example, let's say if I type in 127.0.0.1 here, and since this is an IP range here, this basically is okay. So before that, what it basically does here, this is an application, let's say, which basically helps you to ping a device. Now, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to enter an IP address. For that IP address, this would ping and say, what was the duration it took for this ping to happen and all of that. Okay, it basically tries to ping that particular IP address. Now, I gave a simple 127.0.0.1 and submitted it, and then accordingly it gave out this. Now, other than this, I could also try and see if I could type in some commands and see how it would basically respond. Okay, so in this command, I'm basically trying to see if ls works. When I try that, ls does work, right? Ls is a Linux command for listing the contents of a given directory, right? Uh, so here it does list down, right? For example, if I do a simple 127.0.0.1, then it doesn't show up that particular aspects. But if I do an ls, it does list down. Right? It does show this. Now, what I could do here is, let me see if this works. So if I do index.php, so it does show me all the details of the page. It basically sort of was able to sort of read that particular file, which is index.php, and then show me the contents of that file, right? So again, of course, for that I'll have to look at basically look at the source of this particular page to sort of understand the details here. It is not aligned correctly here, but you understand what exactly happened there, right? Now, basically, this is allowing me to perform certain commands, right? I know for the fact that there is Linux system that is running in the background. So it could actually, I know, again, how does an attacker know that? Again, this could be done by certain level of information gathering. By looking at the request responses. Let's say if I look at the Burp suite, in the HTTP history, if you go look at the different requests and what are the responses that are given, you will see somewhere here what is the server that is running. Say the server that is running is Nginx. Okay. Now Nginx again is at a core level, it looks at Linux being used, right? Now, if it was an IA server, then it would have been Windows, right? So considering all those aspects, you will have to try out different information gathering mechanisms to understand what is the underlying operating system that is running on the server where this application is hosted. So for now, this pinger device application is hosted on a Linux machine. And that's why I'm going to be trying out Linux commands, right? So what happened here is this 127.0.0.1 is fine. After that, I give a semicolon and then I execute a different command. Okay. And I basically try to execute a different command. So the reason why this happened in the first place is because PHP as a technology itself has a function called as eval function. Okay. So that is considered as a very dangerous function. And since that is being utilized in this particular application, that's where it is allowing the eval function is known to allow the execution of commands. Okay. Now this eval function can if it is used, an attacker could basically add in any Linux commands or these kind of commands, and then those eventually get executed. That would be one of the reasons, and that's where you could see this command injection happening, right? Of course, there could be other malicious commands. Once you're allowed to enter the commands here, it is again purely dependent on what access does that particular user have over the application that they could execute those commands. All right. Any questions on this so far? Is Burp only running on Mozilla Firefox? Not really. It also can be run on Chrome as well. So if you see Burp Suite, if you go to the interception here, you have this option called Open Browser. So if you don't wish to if you don't want to take the hassle of going into a particular browser and then trying to sort of install or make configuration changes for Burp, you could instead go and sort of open the browser here. It would open up a Chromium browser, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, so it opens up a Chromium browser, and then you can basically start adding in your target, and then you can start performing your VAPT. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so to make it a little interactive, I have a certain sort of questions. Uh, So let's take an example of the brute force. Okay. So you see that, with this kind of an implementation, I can constantly go on and try out different passwords, different usernames, one after the other, right? Now, my question here is how, if let's say you are the owner of this application, right? You have hosted this application on your own. How would you protect this application from an attacker trying brute force mechanism for, say, username and password? Can someone type it out? You can take guesses if you want to, but I just want for you guys to learn or sort of at least look at applications, from a security perspective. That's purely that. Let's say I'm an attacker. If I wanted to attack your application, I'm going to try brute force. Now, how will you stop me from using brute force? Is there an implementation that you would have on your application which will stop me from performing a brute force attack? CAPTCHA? Okay, that's a good one. That's a good answer. Someone sent it to me privately. I think if you can send it to everyone, that would really help. Others would also learn that.
Yeah, I
CAPTCHA is
request
a good
everybody to
implementation.
please send messages to everyone, all the participants.
Okay. Math calculations. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Every time. So basically, yeah. Okay. Both of you have sent the right answer, in fact, because with these two, what happens is why the brute force becomes very difficult when these two things are implemented. Picture identification. This is the other one. Yes, that is good. These two, what really happens when when you're implementing CAPTCHA or a math calculation to be done or a picture identification to be done and all of that, right? Uh, you basically are stopping the automated scan to run, very frequently, right? You will see that, in the burp suite also, things were running very sequentially, right? One after the other, one after the other, right? You will stop that flow basically, when that captcha is added, the captcha keeps changing, and captcha doesn't have a static value. It is dynamic. It keeps changing. On the other side, your username and your passwords are static, right? They will not change unless you change your password later on. But of course, most of the times they remain, I mean, they are moreover static. But on the other side, for every request, your captcha keeps changing. So obviously that is a layer, that is one parameter which cannot be decided by the attacker, right? Uh, yes, so that's where, these things will certainly be a good implementation if you want to limit someone from brute forcing. Now, limiting is also a great option. Of course, a lot of organizations follow this, when you say limiting, it is basically rate limiting, right? How many number of users can, how many number of attempts can a user make, right? When you're trying to brute force, obviously you're going to be having a lot of failed attempts. How many failed attempts are possible in a small duration or a small given duration is what you can basically set, right? Someone also mentioned limited time password can be set up. That's a good one. So what you're basically saying is you're forcing the user to change the password after a certain duration of time. That is great. That's what organizations should implement. Some are implementing, some are not. But yeah, that's a good one. On the other side, someone also mentioned MFA, multi-factor authentication. Yes, of course. That will add as a second layer of defense in case if the login is still brute forceable, if someone still brute forces it, and then tries to log in, they still have another layer to pass, which involves either getting an SMS or remember or having a list of codes, which of course an attacker would very unlikely have access to, right? So yeah, I think I'm happy that all of you are thinking in the right terms, in fact, because all the answers that you have given are in fact correct. Yes, OTP is again, it's part of your MFA itself, right? Multi-factor authentication, right? Okay. So that was one. Okay. In the similar lines, for command injection, what would you do? So what is the approach that you think should be taken for command injection? Let's say if I am an attacker who sees that, okay, your application is vulnerable to command injection. Now what would you do? How will you ensure that I do not provide any commands and perform any malicious activity on your systems, on your servers? Okay, any answers? Okay, not a problem. That's fine. Okay. Any other questions so far? All right. Okay. So, okay. So for today's session, I wanted to cover up over this topic of uh, the cookie, which is going to be very important. So, cookie values are something that are primarily important for an application, right? So when I log in to this application, there's a cookie value that gets generated. Okay. So let's log out and basically see how that really works here. So I've logged out. Let's say I now log in, uh, or instead of that, let me just refresh this page and while keeping the interception on. So when I do this, I see that there is a very generic PHP session ID that is given. Okay, this PHP session ID is purely a session ID that is given when the user is not even logged in, right? It is still it is something that is very generic. Okay, now uh, I'll just basically forward this now. Okay, now uh, let me go back to this. If I give in the username and password here, and I basically try to log in, of course. Okay, now I'll basically send this to repeater. Now let me see. So the PHP session ID, the generic one, is already given now. Now when I send this, Okay, I think something went wrong. So now basically log into this. Let me open the proxy, forward this. Okay, now the PHP session ID is still the same. I'll send to repeater. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I forward this. I basically come to this particular page now. Okay, now in the HTTP history, uh, you see that your index page is showing up. Okay, now when I basically log in, so what they are trying to do here is they're using the same PHP session ID uh, for after I log in, it is going to be used uh, for that basically gets upgraded to from a generic PHP session ID to a session ID which has a certain uh, access control that is involved. Okay. Now, since this is a PHP session ID that is given, uh, if this gets exposed, then an attacker would basically log into the application by giving the same session ID and then get into someone else's session. Okay. Now, the way this is usually given out is there is something called as a set cookie value, I think, which we discussed earlier. I'm trying to see a different request where I could show you the set cookie value. Should usually be in the beginning. Yeah. So here you see that the set cookie, being the PHP session ID is given this, and then there are certain other parameters that are added to this. Okay, so there is something called as HTTP only. There is something also called as secure. There is something also called as same site cookie and all of that. Okay, the same site part we'll discuss now in some times, but the HTTP only basically defines that who would basically be able to access uh, uh, the basically the cookie, right? So it would basically mean that only the inline JavaScript could be able to access this, and if there is any other external website who would want to access this particular the PHP session ID, it should not allow that. Okay, and on the other side, if it has something called as set cookie as secure, it would then basically mean that this cookie value has to travel between the systems only via secure mechanism. When I say secure mechanisms, it is via HTTPS. Okay, if that secure flag is added, then it means that this token cannot travel with your usual HTTP, uh, uh, HTTP request. Basically, a simple HTTP request. It has to travel via HTTPS. Okay, so in the other lines, there is also something called as same site. That is a bit of a complex topic, which we will cover in the next section. Uh, Once the set cookie is done, okay, set cookie is something that is initially given out when you are basically trying to log in to an application. Once you are logging, the server basically will have to use the same session ID for every request that it makes. Okay, and once that is done, is when it basically the server will identify that okay, so this particular user is from this particular session, and then this particular user is making the request, and accordingly it would basically allow that. Uh, I'm trying to see if the session okay. So from here we have a different session that gets changed. I was trying to see if the set cookie parameter was captured here. Yeah. So this 1347 is this. So basically it is following the same one. But yeah, so I think this is a different one. Okay. So yeah, I think so. This was a different session that was set, and then eventually the session ID, the session value got changed, and then it has been used further from there. So for every request, this has to usually go for for the response to basically come, and for the server to not for the responses basically, but for the server to at least identify that who's making the request. Okay, and that's what the cookie value would basically do. And this has to be set in such a manner that you also define when would this session ID has to expire, so that after a certain duration of time, the server will basically stop taking in requests if a user basically sends any request using this PHP session ID. Okay, cool. So this is about the session ID. Of course, there are a lot of other attacks that are specifically involved with alterations of these session IDs or making any modifications to these and all of that. Of course, we will be looking at in depth in the next session. But and as this was purely like a very fundamental discussion that I wanted to have with you all. This is what I wanted to showcase to you all. So any questions so far so that I can answer them? Uh, Please feel
Yeah,
free to
any
reach out to
questions,
me.
participants, please feel free to put it in the chat box.
Okay, so not a problem. I don't see there's any questions being added so far. So in the next session, so in today's session, so just to give a quick recap, in today's session, what we basically did was we looked at certain fundamentals of HTTP, the request and the responses. What kind of parameters that you will basically get to see in the request, and then what are the different parameters that get to see as part of the response as well, and how the request body would basically look like, and the response body in the similar lines. And then also we looked at the three main fundamental functionalities of Burp Suite as a proxy, which is one as a proxy, then you have an intruder, then there is also something called as repeater, right? On the other lines, we also touched upon at a very fundamental level as to how a brute force is usually done, and how it would be different between doing a brute force using intruder versus the repeater. In the similar lines, we also looked at command injection. We just sort of looked at the XSS reflected and stored XSS, from a beginner perspective, and a bit of it on the SQL injection as well, right? Now, in the next session, what we'll be looking at is we'll be looking at a little deeper level into these different vulnerabilities that we just discussed today. Okay, and then because I just wanted to set the ground first for you all to understand the fundamental aspects as to how we would use brute force and what are the HTTP parameters that we'll be looking at, so that we'll be making manipulations using repeaters and all of that to look at it at a much more deeper level in the next session. I hope this was helpful. I didn't want to keep it more of a presentation type. I wanted it to be more of a hands-on. I hope this was helpful to you all. I will surely be sending those documents as well, that as I promised, which would basically involve whatever we spoke today, and then a much more structured documentation around the same. Any queries, question? We still do have like I think 5 more minutes left.
Yes, in case the participants have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box.
Okay, so I believe there's no questions.
Yeah, Nikhil, I think there are no questions. So I'm getting some good feedback in private. I don't know why people are posting private messages. Yeah, there's one question from
There's
one
one
user.
question. Yes, yes, please
I
do go
hope
ahead
the
and ask.
user posts to everyone, please.
We will cover all the OWASP attack. Uh, okay, so in the short given time frame that is uh, given, which is for the next topic, right? We will try to cover the major ones, but I can't promise that I'll be able to cover all of the OWASP attacks. The OWASP top 10 is what what I mean. As I said, we'll be looking at things like the top five at least, if not three, top five at least. The rest of them, I will certainly share the necessary resources so that you all could be able to take them further from there.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, Shrikant.
One second,
Please.
Nikhil.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something saying top three or top five. Did you?
I did mention if not three, top five at least for sure.
Okay, I think Professor Shrikant Prabhu has got a question. We'll just wait.
Yes, sir.
Professor
Please
Shrikant,
go
can
ahead.
you please type out your question? Professor Shrikant, can you please type out your question on the chat box?
Okay, so Professor Shrikant is asking, what is the relation of biometrics and penetration testing? Again, so there is penetration testing that could be done on the way these biometric systems are being set up or how these biometric data is being captured. Again, it depends. But when we do an application security penetration testing, it is purely for the application. If the application by any chance involves authentication or authorization using any biometrics mechanism, then it would basically go with but then we would basically go with pen testing those aspects as well. Which biometric is the best? Well, that's a bit of a debatable topic. Whether you would want to look at the iris scan or the face scan or the fingerprint or anything as such. But again, these are very contextual. It depends on what kind of application that you're trying to protect and how would you be implementing them. Also, the team would be great if some light can be thrown on VAPT aspects from overall picture. Uh, okay, from overall picture is I didn't get the question right, probably.
Yeah,
You
the
can,
question on overall picture, can you please elaborate a little? The speaker's a little confused.
Professor Shrikant asks what features? Yes, sir. So again, like for example, the biometrics that you would want to use for a banking application is going to be completely different for, you know, comparing that to what you want to use for authentication for, say, an e-commerce platform, right? Because the kind of data that you're trying to protect with a banking application is totally different from what you're trying to protect with an e-commerce app. So that is the reason. That is the kind of features that I was saying. Yeah, okay. So overall picture in short, like other aspects. Right now we are looking at web VAPT. Sure, I should be able to do a quick, a small portion of that of the next talk on the other aspects, such as what you're saying is web VAPT. So there is network VAPT, there's mobile VAPT. Yes, I can touch upon those topics as well. Not a problem.
Yeah, Professor Shrikant asks, cookies, can it be made soft and fuzzy? Nikhil.
Uh, I didn't quite understand soft and fuzzy.
Professor Shrikant, can you please explain soft and fuzzy?
So when you say fuzzy, you mean to say do you, if the cookies can be made more unpredictable, yes, that's how they are supposed to be. The session ID values should be something that uh, are to be generated with pseudo random number generators, uh, and they are to be made highly unpredictable ones. Ambiguity, yes, yes, exactly. That's what even I was referring to. Yes, it has to have a certain level of uh, ambiguity to it because you do not want it to be easily predictable. Yes, yes, exactly. So you do not when basically, if it is highly predictable, if it is in a put out in a very serialized manner, like for example, if the session ID value is A B C D E F, then the next value should not be like like AB, if it is A B C D E F 1, the next value should not be A B C D E F 2, right? That becomes like easily predictable. So those aspects are something are usually considered while cookie parameters and values are decided. Uh, okay. Okay. The next question is how to run VAPT scanners. Can that be touched upon as well using free tool? The VAPT scanners, sure. I can. Okay. So in this session, I have taken on Burp Suite. So there is a similar open source and free community tool called as OWASP Zap that is very similar to what Burpsuite also does. It has an automated scanner. I think the last 5 minutes of next session, I will keep it for the VAPT scanner. But I believe the next session might get a little extended, probably by 15 minutes. I hope that should be fine with everyone. Okay.
Yeah, as long as the participants are interested and they keep asking you questions, we would be very happy.
Yep. More than happy. Yes. Okay. Okay. The next question from Professor Shrikant is, can cookies have shapes or geometries? When you say shapes or geometries, what I would basically rather put it out as is you can have multiple cookie parameters added, like multiple cookies being used. Like there are applications where which have used multiple cookie values, multiple session IDs. So if an attacker gets access to one of the session ID, the attacker would still need to have access to the other session IDs as well. So that will bring in like a multi-dimensional approach to it. So yeah, I think that can be done as well. Where can we get the materials? The document that I spoke about, uh, I would need at least a day or two to send it out. Uh, yeah. Can we predict methods? Uh, when you say methods, you mean to say HTTP methods? Can we predict methods for selecting tools? I didn't quite get that, so if you can rephrase the question, that'll help me. What is PCA? SVM? Oh, okay. So are you talking about uh, machine learning by any chance?
Yeah, is this something like support vector machines or principal
Uh,
component analysis?
exactly. Okay.
Dr. Prabhu, I think you
Yes,
can
yes.
unmute and speak. I've requested him to unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, in the meantime, yeah, he's saying yes, but
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
it was a machine learning thing. Yeah,
Yes, it was
I
a
think
machine
he
learning.
saw your background is in machine learning.
As machine learning. Okay,
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
Yes, I think that is possible. With the help of machine learning, yes, that could be done. But again, that's a good point that you have brought in. But again, when we look at security, right, security of applications, or when you're trying to look at the attacking of applications, again, it fundamentally boils down to two aspects. One is the code aspect, and the other is the data aspect. So the application has its own code, and then the data is something that is user defined, right? The user basically enters it. Now, As long as the machines are able to differentiate between these two, uh, I think that should be fine. Uh, but there are times when i- the code gets added to the data and then the machine is not able to identify which is code and which is data. That's where the problem arises. So that's where even this day and age, though we have a lot of automated tools for security, but even then, for certain business logical issues, we would still go with a manual penetration testing approach. So which of the tools are used for penetration testing? I think one of the tools that we looked at today, which is Burp Suite, is one of the tools that can be used, which is widely used in the industry for penetration testing. There are other tools also, but it depends on what kind of pen testing that you want to do. So like today we are looking at web application pen testing. In the similar lines, you also have ones for network pen testing. So there are tools like Nessus, or there are other tools like, there's something called as MobSF for mobile applications. So these could be used for those specific pen testing. Mm, Other recommendations that we will cover, like we did for brute force, OTP captcha, etc. If time permits, of course, I can do that for all the vulnerabilities that we are going to be discussing on. Yes, of course, but the documents that I'll be sharing will certainly have those. Which type of vulnerabilities we get in OWASP Zapster in automated scan? Yes. So again, it is not that okay. So what you basically mean is what are the kind of vulnerabilities that we can find using OWASP Zap, right? So most of the the intrusive ones, or the ones where the user could basically manipulate data to get a different kind of an output, those are something that is possible. But anything that has got to do business logic level vulnerabilities, those are something that tools may not be able to help us. So when I say business logic, for example, if you're logging in as a normal user, whether or not you have access to resources for admin level functions is something that tools cannot help you with. For those things, you will have to look at manually. Any sample report analysis? Good. I will try to get a sample report from the internet somewhere, because anything that is posted on the internet is a public data, and I should be able, if I'm able to get that, I can surely run you through a sample VAPT report and showcase that to you as well. Yes. I'm making these notes as I speak to you all as to what are the things that are something that I can cover, as part of next session.
Okay, Nikhil, I think that's about it for today.
Yeah.
I'm sure that all the participants are greatly enthused by your webinar, and this is certainly in recent times one of the webinars which has seen a lot of student participation, and
Okay.
that is an
Thank you
extremely
so much.
encouraging sign.
Indeed. Thank you
So
so
we
much.
would
Thank you
like
so
to
much for this.
retain, some of your brand value for the next part of the seminar, which is again going to be a webinar that takes place on the 22nd at the same time.
Sure.
And I'd like to thank you for having put together this, very, I'd not only say informative, but I'd also like to compliment you for trying to make it very interactive.
Sure. Thank you, Abhishek. Thank
And
you so much for
I'm
that.
sure a lot of participants are acknowledging on the chat that they learned a lot. I'm sure that they definitely have. And even as they leave this webinar, they left with a lot of questions, which will be addressed in Thursday's webinar.
Of course. Yes, I'll do that.
So I think you
Thank you
can
so much.
drop
I'm
off
happy.
now, and I will
Yeah.
make the remaining announcements.
Sure. Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
very
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you.
See you all.
Dear participants, it is now time for the assessment. So I will now paste the link to the assessment for today's webinar in the chat box. The assessment will be open for 1 hour. Yeah, so there you go. It is now about 5:39, and I think We will close the assessment in 1 hour. By 18:40 hours, the assessment will be closed. So you have a time of 60 minutes to attempt this assessment. It's a relatively simple assessment if you have been listening to all the different concepts that our speaker, Mr. Nikhil Kulkarni, just spoke about, and you should be able to answer it quite easily. There are 15 questions and there is no negative marking. I would encourage you to attempt this certification, and I would encourage you to answer all questions without any hesitation.